Welcome to Worth Your Time with your hosts from the nationally syndicated Bob and Tom Show, Kristi Lee, and the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Zoo, Dr. Rob Shumaker. Our mission to inform, entertain, and educate with guests from all aspects of life. We guarantee there isn't another podcast that features two hosts with such different backgrounds and discussions with remarkable people doing exceptional things. So let's get started. Here are your hosts, Kristi Lee and Dr. Rob Shumaker.
We are so excited to have a great guest today. He is an ordained minister, a stand-up comic, a professor, a speaker, full-time therapist. The list goes on and on and on. But most importantly, one of my dearest friends, Dr. Will Miller, joining us. Dr. Will, Dr. Rob Shumaker. I would
nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you, and I'm a big fan. I've read about your work. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We're big fans of yours. And for those that are listening that just tuned in, if they're not familiar with Dr. Will, maybe some people are from your Why We Watch on Nick at Night. Obviously, you have a wonderful stand-up career with some of the greats that I would love for you to talk about. Just give us a glimpse as to how getting on stage in New York City came to be.
I moved down from Massachusetts. I had quit my job after I got my doctorate, and I moved down to New York and just started at the showcase clubs. And the others in the showcase clubs were Jerry Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and Eddie Murphy and yada, yada, yada. All of us unknown. Some of us remain fairly unknown, but we had a great collegiality with each other. And what was interesting is that we all had similar childhoods where like there were religious backgrounds or whatever. And back then in the showcase clubs, you know what they paid you to do a set at like Comic Strip or Catch Rising Star? $5.
$5.
It was called taxi cab fare. So you had to earn your living by booking yourself in clubs, nightclubs during the week in New Jersey and Connecticut. And I did that 7 nights a week for 15 years. I absolutely loved it. They're still friends of mine. It was a delightful career. It really was. And so at one point, an agent said, "Hey, you're a therapist. Nickelodeon is interested in hiring you to do these interstitial spots where you would play Dr. Will, television psychotherapist."
Wow.
And so we were in the studio, and Tom Hill and I wrote these bits. And for example, I would do a psychoanalysis of, say, Gilligan's Island.
Okay.
And I would say, Gilligan's Island is a show about rage. Here's a young man who, through his ineptitude, essentially destroyed the lives of 6 other people. You're watching the show wondering, could this be the episode where one of the other castaways rose up and murdered Gilligan in retaliation? Then there was a little bridge. And then I would say, what about you? Do you have a part of your inner life that sabotages your well-being? Do you have an inner Gilligan? Unless you slay your inner Gilligan, you'll never get off the island of your loneliness. I did about 30 of them for several years. They were an absolute blast to do. Joe Friday's Repression, all sorts of stuff. I really had a great time. But I was still doing stand-up all that while.
Now, did you write those yourself?
Yes, with Tom Hill. Wow. I was studying at the Psychoanalytic Institute at the time. I was a therapist. As a matter of fact, I was a comic at night, and I was working at a heroin clinic on the Lower East Side of Manhattan at the time. And so I took all of that material from my psychological experiences and applied it. It just fit like a glove. It was great.
So wait a minute. You took your therapy to the comedy clubs, or did you take your therapy to your heroin patients, or the comedy to the heroin patients?
I had a dual life. I had a professional life in graduate school at Columbia University, and my treatment during the day was at this heroin clinic in Chinatown. But then at night, I was doing stand-up every night of the week. So, yeah, it was I clearly have ADHD.
Clearly.
But that must have been, to think about working with addicts all day long. Of course, you can provide incredible help and incredible service to them, but what a toll that must take on you.
You know what you learn? You learn, it's the same thing you learn in your field. It's about compassion.
Yeah.
You know, anyone who works with animals, it's compassion, because there's a way in which their vulnerability depends on you protecting them from their vulnerability.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the same thing in therapy. It's like, I've been working with the police for about 15 years. And I often tell the police officers, I really trained a lot in trauma. Let me just bear with me on this. And so trauma is like what? Fight, flight, or freeze. So I'll say to the cops, don't lose your humanity because you're involved with someone who's a mess.
Yeah.
Because they became that some way. Yeah, I've always mixed my love for stand-up comedy and humor with my day job and my desire to be compassionate. What was interesting is it never appeared in my act, Bob, never.
Wow.
I remember one time we were at the comic strip and it was after the show at 1 a.m. and we were going down to get some food after the show. And Paul Reiser said to me, let me get this straight. You grew up Catholic. You're in the Army. You were married and divorced. You have a doctorate. And you're up there and your act is about cars and dogs. What the hell is wrong with you? There was nothing of my life in my act. And that was a big mistake that I made. I was never transparent in that way. So I've had
Did you change after that?
Yeah, I did. Now I do. When I still do speaking, I do stuff that's about my life. I remember during COVID, for example, I was doing a lot of performing, and I would talk about how you cope with that. I remember one time saying that the trauma people say the best way you can cope with trauma is yoga. I said, okay. So I went to a yoga studio.
Yoga.
And first of all, I was horrified by the outfits. I walked in the back. They were shockingly vivid.
Okay.
And so I couldn't do any of the moves. And at one point when they said, you can now get on the ground, I said, just get a rope and drag me out of the car because I can't get up. So I've always had an ear and an eye for stand-up and loved it. And my time in the Bob and Tom show was emblematic of that. You know, I was there as like a therapist, and Bob was always telling me to be more comedic. And, I found that to be a little bit of a difficulty to come over that divide. So, yeah. But, stand-up was a blast.
So I'm curious, did doing stand-up make you better as a therapist, or does therapists make you better doing, or it doesn't matter?
I think it goes both ways, because very often I think about, for example, any performer who's in the limelight of the rough and tumble of concerts or shows. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the audience is a frickin' mess. They come into that show and you don't know what they've dragged in with them from their day. And your job is to distract them but as well as I do that up there I'm also a therapist. I wonder what the hell happened to this person today. I just have an insatiable curiosity about what makes a person tick.
Have you found out yet?
Yeah, it's pathology. Everyone's crazy.
Okay, fair enough. Well,
you know what? For example, I have gotten insights into the distinctions about how people are raised. There are some wonderful scholars who talk about how boys versus girls are raised. Because of my work with the police, I've gotten very sensitive to the vulnerability of women and the kind of the psychological mess of men. They're not raised well. And so that's why I'm a Swiftie. I think that girl is just over the top with a voice that's confronting the vulnerability of women. And it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Yeah, it's good. I wonder if animals, fight, flight, or freeze, is that not emblematic in the animal kingdom?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I was having a conversation with a colleague recently, and we were talking about it. This is great because it gives a woman's perspective, something I would not have considered. She was talking about the difference between animals that are predators, species that are predators versus species that are prey, and how differently they behave when they're about to give birth, when they're getting close within a few days. And her opinion, she's incredibly skilled. She's done this forever. She's really fantastic, Laura Baylock. And she said, you always know when a carnivore is getting ready to give birth because, man, she gets in a bad mood for about a week ahead of time.
Ooh.
And she just doesn't want anybody around her. She knows something's going on, and she just goes into a defensive posture. The predators, the prey, give no indication whatsoever because evolutionarily they're at a disadvantage constantly. So they don't ever show a disadvantage. Way in advance, a predator's getting ready, and when it's a prey, it's a surprise. Oh, look, they had a baby. You never know what's coming.
There's a great scholar, I think it's Porteous or Levine, who showed a video when you're training as a therapist. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Yeah.
And the fawn emblem comes from a video that they showed with a drone. This was amazing, of a cheetah chasing a fawn at 60 miles an hour through the forest. And finally, the fawn says, is exhausted and falls over. They showed, I can't believe they got this on footage. So the cheetah goes up, and now the cheetah's exhausted. So it just sits down to recover. And all of a sudden, what trumps into the scenario is a predator of the cheetah.
Oh.
So the cheetah gets up and flees. And 30 seconds later, this fawn, which seemed dead, gets up and trots away.
Yeah.
Now, fawn is an amazing phenomena in all critters that when you feel helpless, you just collapse.
Yeah.
You just collapse. And that's so in the animal kingdom. A lot of people who work with, I've worked a lot with PTSD and soldiers, and horseback riding, working with horses, is a very powerful healing effect with them. They get along. It's really amazing what they can do together. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a good friend who runs an equine therapy place, and
There you go.
is amazing. The
Yep.
kids that come in there, special needs children, like you said, victims of trauma. It is very incredible, the healing that goes
Because
on.
that species they are prey. The guy who really schooled me on stress he's from Stanford University, and he wrote the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Oh,
And he said the zebra was a pack animal, and they would show that the zebra's in the pack, and all of a sudden, a lion comes into the scene, and the zebras start running. All of a sudden, it's, they got Fred. They got one of them, and they all calm down, and they start eating again as if nothing ever happened.
We didn't really like
He,
it.
he opined that the human being is really well equipped to handle an acute stressor and come down. We are poorly designed for chronic stress that which just eats at us. And so imagine the fun I've had crossing paths with the study, not in depth like you, Dr. Bob, but this idea that all critters, great and small, all share a lot of the same defensive mechanisms and capacity to rebound. And so it's been an amazing study. I've just loved it.
it's an incredible topic. Robert Sapolsky, by the way.
Sapolsky, that's the guy.
And by the way, also a primatologist. He does tremendous primate work.
Exactly.
That ability to rebound is something that's incredible to me. When you meet, and this is primarily with great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, so on. When you meet an individual and that individual has gone through maybe some of the worst situations you could imagine for years. And then finally they're removed from that situation. They get in a wonderful, enlightened situation. And it's incredible to me that they can let that go in a way humans have difficulty doing. That is a remarkable adaptation to me. And I think a big difference between humans and other great apes, and not a great thing for humans. We have real trouble letting it go.
Well, a lot of it's simply the mantra in trauma is to feel safe, just to feel safe. That's it, full stop. So in stand-up comedy, honest to God, there is a parallel here. You get on stage, the audience has to feel like you're safe and that you're talking to them and they're not threatened. Even the aggressive comics. Sapolsky is a genius. He studied baboons.
Yeah.
And in my talk, I would say, you ever see a baboon? I always wish they were wearing slacks. Just gross looking. And he talked about how the alpha male is in charge of everyone, and everyone else has to be alert and aware of where the alpha guy is. And there was one, he took his students to Kenya, and they found the same pack of baboons. And one summer when they went there, this pack had come upon an abandoned human camp that had rotting food. All the alphas ate the food, and they died. So the remnant of this was all females, and they were healthier than ever. Their blood came up to healthy because the males were gone.
Wow, it sounds like the Bob and Tom show. We have an alpha male that we follow around all the time. Yeah.
Of course, absolutely. And stand up, you have to absorb all this because it helps me to relate to the audience about what your situation is. That's really what it is. It's been a blast.
Do you find that having that stand up, that ability to make people laugh, helps you in a therapy session?
Yeah, obviously I have to be contained about a lot of my stand-up really echoed my background, which is from Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of what has that voice. I need to turn that voice down when I'm sitting with somebody in a session. What's interesting is that the new wave in therapy is telehealth, is doing it on the screen. That's been a real revelation to me because you feel very self-conscious when you get in your car, you drive to the doctor's office, you sit in the waiting room. This has helped me have faster starts with people who just get on a telehealth situation that's HIPAA compliant, and they're able to be more revelatory right away. Stephen Porges is the guy who does, and this is really amazing, crossover also with animals. The vagal nerve is our alarm system.
Yeah.
That's the nerve in your body that says, uh-oh, I'm scared. Controlling that, I say to people, and because I'm on stage and I'm looking at faces of men and women, I tune in to the faces of both and the women, and you can read a lot of what's going on. The flat face, the frozen face, and when you make that person smile, it's a delight because you've changed their affect, and who knows what the hell they're going to face when they go out of the club. But the fact of the matter is they feel safe when they're there, that I'm not threatening. I was in the Army. I was drafted into the Army. And I always remember this. I'm in basic training, and it's like during the Vietnam era, our group didn't have to go. But anyway, I'm in there, and I realized that I'm no freaking warrior. I don't have a warrior bone in my body. That's when we had to do hand-to-hand combat. I said, oh, shit, just give it up. I'd be dead in 4 seconds. Just come kill me. I was more like Beetle Bailey in that. But the macho male stuff in that climate had to be like brought out in those people. Oh, let's turn these nice boys into something that's other than that. So I've always been fascinated with that and how people respond. Yeah.
That's a big thing that people talk about right now. The macho man, the testosterone levels, and then I don't want to call it the woke left or the woke kids. Everybody's, you are who you are and we are who we are. And it's changed the male-female thing. Does that make sense?
I just want to ask the question, what's the good part, Sparky, of being aggressive? Tell me what that is.
Yeah.
Schmucko. If you're not defending your life, sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
Could I just say, schmucko is an underused and wonderful word.
I've never heard schmucko.
You've never heard
Totally.
schmuck?
No, I've heard schmuck, but not schmucko.
Schmucko is great.
Schmuck is a Yiddish word that means the male part. That's
it
what
does?
It is. Yes, absolutely.
I didn't know
It's your tool.
That is Dr. Will's bringing back schmucko. We love that.
Yeah, you can title this episode "Bringing Back Schmucko."
Bringing back schmucko. I want that.
I was a
shirt.
comic at the comic strip. I remember Eddie Murphy was a new comic, and so we were all comics at the comic strip. And this is a really amazing story. So the comic strip owned a club in Fort Lauderdale, and we could go down and do a week or two there, which was great. And so Eddie was down there one time, and lo and behold, it was the same week that Saturday Night Live had to recast their cast because Garrett Morris, they needed an African-American player. And the guy who was next in line was Charlie Barnett.
Wow.
Charlie Barnett was a great black comedian, mostly worked outside. And it was really tragic. When he got there, he didn't know Saturday Night Live is all on cue cards, and he couldn't read.
Oh,
so it was heartbreaking. So he left. So who's next in the queue is Eddie. And so they call the comic strip, and the guy goes, hey, Eddie, come on back up here. They want you to be on Saturday Night Live. Completely left turn. He got on, and of course, he just lit it up. And then a little while later, he's got 48 hours. So I'm the MC one night on a Sunday night at the comic strip. And what would happen at any of those clubs? Celebrities or stars, which is Eddie or Jerry Seinfeld or Rodney Dangerfield, would pop in to do a, quote, guest set. So I'm on stage, and all of a sudden they say, hey, Eddie's here to do a guest set. It's a Sunday night. So I look over, and I could see the other guys huddled. And I said, oh, man, you are in for a surprise because we have a great guest from Saturday Night Live 48 Hours. And we used to call him Irish Eddie Murphy. Come on up here, Eddie. The audience, he would always go up, and he would have the same act. No one knew who he was. And he'd go, yeah, how you doing? Yeah, screw you too. But they roared. They stood up and roared toward him because he was a megastar. And it was my first exposure to the overnight trip when someone is famous and the action they get on stage when people know who they are. And any comic you know now who fills a stadium or fills a club, it's because people come in ready and knowing who they are. And that's a game changer. So Eddie, he looks over at us and shrugged the shoulders like, the hell do I do now? It was really a lot of fun. I can remember when Sam Kinison was coming to New York for the first time. And so I'm at the comic strip, and he goes up and he does his screaming thing, okay? Out in the shadows in front of me is David Letterman and his producer. And they were there to see Sammy. After Sammy does his roaring thing, we go out to the bar. And Letterman comes out, and I say, "Hey, David, what did you think of Sammy?" And he put his face right into my face, and he went, "Oh!" and screamed in my face. And he was on the next night. So it was a blast. It really was a blast.
So you worked with Rodney Dangerfield?
Oh, my favorite.
Oh, many times.
I had a feeling.
Oh, Rodney.
Yeah.
God, he had the. Oh God, did he have the? And you know what? Mostly he was at Catch a Rising Star, and he would come up there with a yellow pad, and comics would write jokes for him. And if he used it on the Tonight Show, he would pay you $50. So all the comics were writing for him, and he was just an amazingly brilliant guy who restarted his comedy career at 47. He was at Pips in Brooklyn. And now he's the guy who named him Rodney Dangerfield, and gave him the clip, "I Get No Respect." And he just took off. His one-liners, of course, are legendary. Then he opened his club. Yeah, legend is right. And his delivery was just beyond the beyond. So his jokes were incredible. And he was a very nice guy. A little bit of too much nose candy for him. Do you know what I mean? Really? It was like, but that was common back in the day. Matter of fact, when I got diagnosed fairly recently with ADHD, they put me on Adderall, which is an upper. And I told my comedy friends, "Hey, remember back in the 80s when a lot of guys were doing coke and we weren't?" Yeah. I said, "I'm on coke now." So
I gotta say, Rodney Dangerfield, one of my all-time favorites, and the one-liners he had in the movie Back to School in the 80s, still some of my all-time favorites.
Oh, yeah.
What a legend.
His delivery, it was just amazing. And he was just a super guy. He really was. He really lived on First Avenue. And of course, he was so casual. He would come in to Catch a Rising Star sometimes in his pajamas or his bathrobe. Oh. Seriously. And then he would get up on stage because why not? I mean, who cares? And so he's up there. "Hey, it's Rodney Dangerfield." He goes, hey, what a crowd. Like Richard Bells who would bring him up or something. You know, so I had so much contact with people who went on to wonderful things. You know what I mean? It was just a blast. Ray Romano became a favorite of Letterman, and Letterman backed him with his show. And Ray Romano, everybody loves Raymond. And the brother was played by Brad Garrett.
One of our favorites. Brad Garrett. Still a friend.
Well, guess what? I have a story about Brad Garrett you're going to love. So we're at the comic strip, and one night we hear that there's a producer from Hollywood who's here to look at acts, whatever. And so Brad comes off the stage, and this guy, he's kind of an older guy, like grizzly. And he says to Brad, "I'd like to represent you." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "I got to tell you, first of all, you're too big for these rooms." And Greg, "No, you're not hearing me. You're too big for these rooms." The clubs all had low ceilings, and it was not a good environment for him. He goes, "You got to move to Las Vegas where they have high ceilings." And so that's what he did. And his act took off there because he was in the bigger rooms.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Brad Garrett is what, 6'9"? He's
6'10". Yeah, exactly. I worked with him in Las Vegas one time, opening for a singer or something. We each were supposed to do 15 minutes. So we do it. So we come off stage before the singer goes on, and there's two guys with thick necks come into the room. And the guy goes, "All right, listen, you're supposed to do 15 minutes. And he pointed at me. "You did 17. Brady goes, "You did 18. That means you went several minutes over. Every minute that you're over, the club loses, I don't know, $200. You owe us this money." I said, "Oh my God." So the next thing, he goes, "Don't do it again." So the next night they put a big clock out in front of us with a countdown. And I swear to God, at 15 minutes, "Good night." It was a blast.
I took Brad Garrett jet skiing one time. And he had never been, I don't even think he could swim. I don't know. We were in the middle of this lake on these big sea-doos, and it was the fun. You can just imagine a 6'9" guy trying to jet ski on these sea-doos who basically couldn't swim.
Wow.
I don't know if I can say what he actually said to me at the time, but it wasn't nice.
Yeah, exactly. What are you doing to me?
What the? And then I had an MR2, a Toyota MR2 at the time, a little tiny car. And I had just met Brad. It was the first time he was on the Bob and Tom show. So it was like 1986 or 85.
Funny. So funny.
He walked out and he picked up the back of my car, literally off the ground. And he goes, "Toy car, Kristi, what are you driving this piece of..." And I'm going, okay. It scared me to death.
Just a sweetheart of a guy,
Oh,
as
he
was
is
Ray Romano
still
and all
wonderful.
of that cast. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
love
great.
Brad.
All of those. One of the things I love about comics who go on to stardom is, with almost no exceptions I can think of, because you get seasoned in the rough and tumble of the clubs when no one knows who the hell you are. When you get up to the top, you don't take that for granted. And I don't know a comic who came up through that system that became, now they might be arrogant to some people in the business, but they're not arrogant to the public.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't be. Most of us came from very religious homes, Jewish or Catholic.
Yep.
It was used to joke about it. As a matter of fact, one of the great comics, it's a tragedy that she died of cancer too young. Abby Stein was one of the great comedians in New York. Every New York comic knew and loved Abby Stein. And she was an amazing story. She quit high school and then came back, became a comic. And she was enamored with me because I had a doctorate. And I told her, go get an education. So while she's a comic, she goes to State University of New York, gets a master's and then a doctorate and works as a professor. It was like a stunning story. But anyway, so one night after the show at the comic strip, she says, hey guys, let's get a cab and go down and get, it's probably not, it's blunt. Let's go down and get some Jew food, one of the Jewish delis down there.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, but Abby, I'm not Jewish. And she looked at me, she put a finger on my chest. She says, you're a comic, you're a Jew. I took that as a badge of honor. That's right. So I've had a blast as a stand-up comic. I miss those guys. I'm still in touch on social media with them, but their acts were terrific. They still are. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, you were definitely in the golden age. That was the golden age of comedy.
Absolutely.
So different now. Now, if you have 5 YouTube videos that 100 people watch, you can get in a club. It's just different.
I know. Go ahead, John.
Is it? I'm amazed because I love stand-up comedy.
I know.
And so, is it different for you watching an incredible comedian that you know personally? Is that different?
What I know about most of them is very few have outside writers. They write their own material. They know their voice, and that's the key. When you know your voice, you're off to the races. Jim Gaffigan, for example, may be the best writer in stand-up comedy. He and his wife write everything he does, but his character is so refined. It's so specific. He never has to drift away from that character.
Yeah, incredible.
It's always there for him. He just writes for that character.
Yeah, he's a good Catholic boy with a lot of kids, and great stories.
And I remember one of my first out-of-town jobs was at the Pittsburgh Comedy Club, which was a gangster club. And we're there in the green room, and it was Jay Leno was the headliner, and it was me and a guy named T.P. Mulrooney from Chicago.
I know T.P.
And
sure.
So we're sitting there in the green room, and the manager comes in, and he goes, hey, open that drawer over there. And so we opened the drawer, and there was like a velvet case. So what the hell's going on? We opened it up, and there was a sterling silver little miniature upright vacuum cleaner, just like that big. And he goes, and next to it was a little bag of cocaine. And so it was like, you're supposed to snort this like through this. And Jay goes, get this crap out of here. Jay Leno knew his voice, knows his voice. He can, if you know your voice and then friends of you know your voice, they can write for you. But mostly you have to stay in your lane, and your lane is your identity. And that's it.
Do you miss doing stand-up, or do you still write in that vein?
I still do. I would love, even though I'm a geezer, I would still love to do it because I still feel like I have my chops. And I would do it more boldly. Doc, when we were talking before about freeze, I had a freeze response. I was like too timid to be bold. And that really stymied my career. I remember I was on Nick at Night, and I was represented by William Morris Agency. And my agent called me up and he goes, hey, guess what? The Bruce Willis people, the guy saw you on Nick at Night, and he goes for the sequel of that movie. He goes, there's my psychiatrist. And so they wanted me to be in that movie. But it got interrupted because in the meantime, NBC was starting a television show called The Other Side. And The Other Side was a daytime talk show about people who had, quote, unusual experiences. Okay, like aliens and all of that. And I'm going, really? But it was like, hey, it was a network television show. I wasn't going to say no to it. So I went to 30 Rock and did a screen test, and they loved it. And so I went out there. And so we had all sorts of people. I got to tell you something. I didn't have the wherewithal to be myself and firm. I should have been a place where I would say, all right, this person says they saw a ghost in their refrigerator. I was just passive. It didn't occur to me to go to the audience. Do you find this credible? I don't find this credible. Versus when we had the episode where the surgeon from the Seattle Children's Hospital came on to talk about children who had an out-of-body experience when they were in crisis. Now, that's something I could get my head around. That's
wow.
So I didn't have the wherewithal, I was frozen, to be firmer and more like on top of, let's talk about this more. But in answer to your question, I still have the performers thing. You know, every comic I know who's famous, they'll live to be 95. I'm going down that path.
Yeah. All right. We're going to take a break, and we're going to continue to talk to Dr. Will, but we're going to go to the other side and maybe get a little more serious and talk about some of the social issues that are facing the isolation of our society, which really feeds into your refrigerator rights book that we would really like to talk about, and maybe try to help some people. I don't know if I can do that, but Dr. Will, you two doctors can. I'm just sitting here.
You help every day on the show, and I'll tell you why when we come back.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Will.
So give me
Is that good?
Yeah, it's great.
Oh, the best.
So join us for part 2.
So we're going to do a quick thing here. So please join us for part 2 with our discussion with Dr. Will Miller. You'll find that, of course, wherever you find your podcast. You're listening to us right now. And be sure and tell your friends all about Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shumaker and Kristi Lee, because word of mouth is the best advertising that we could hope for. So catch us back with Dr. Will Miller.
You've been listening to Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shumaker and Kristi Lee. If you like what you hear, please give a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best compliment. Thanks to our producers, Chris Spangle of Leaders and Legends, LLC. You can reach him at leadersandlegends.net. Also, thanks to Sophie Ritz. I'm Christopher Geisen. Thanks for joining us.